And I get your reaction to the meeting that the Israeli foreign minister had with the Europeans. Apparently an artificial island is the best of what Israeli foreign policy and diplomacy has to offer right now.
Good morning, Dan. It's good to be with you. Yeah, it was interesting because you can imagine just how bewildered at least some of the European foreign ministers who were in the room felt when they thought they were about to have a serious discussion about how to move forward, how to move toward a cessation of hostilities, how to get hostages home safely. And instead, this is what they were met with. As you said, this is not a new plan. It is actually a plan that this minister in particular is known to be, and I quote, obsessed with, and brings it up at every chance he has. But it did leave a bit of a bitter taste, at least in the mouths of some of the European foreign ministers who were expecting a slightly different kind of conversation.
That's exactly right, Rym, and it does seem as if the European lawmakers here were left really bewildered, in fact, by the situation that the Israeli foreign minister put forward. I would, of course, love to speak with him. So if he is watching, please do call me. It'd be great to sit down for an interview to talk about some of those plans. But Rym, to move on from this, Israel has also put forward this new proposition for a 2-month pause in fighting in exchange for the release of all hostages. This plan was first reported by Axios. NBC News also working to confirm details of this most recent plan. Rym, is this a non-starter?
It's not necessarily a non-starter. I mean, what we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks is both sides of this conflict stake out maximalist positions, but the negotiations have been ongoing for the past few weeks, which has been a positive amid such a negative flow of information generally. So clearly, both sides have continued to talk, which shows that they're trying to reach some sort of solution. This is an interesting proposal because it is the longest period of truce or cessation of hostilities that Israel has put on the table. Of course, Hamas is asking for a full ceasefire, an end to the war, as a condition for a new exchange of hostages. And so now it's up to the mediators, especially Egypt and Qatar, but also the U.S. with U.S. Special Envoy for the Middle East, Brett McGurk, coming to the region and in the region in the next couple of days, having to try to, get the two sides to a place where they can move forward with this. There's clearly been an increase in the pressure from the families of the hostages in Israel because they feel like more than 3 months into this military operation in Gaza, none of their loved ones have been released or liberated or freed through a military operation, and rather there was one period of hostage exchange which happened when that one truce was put in place, which lasted for a few weeks.
Indeed, and we saw tensions really boiling over yesterday in Israel when the families of hostages burst into parliament and demanded that government lawmakers do more to get them free. As you say, Rym, it's understood there's about 130 hostages still on the ground there. Exactly what needs to happen in order for them to be released remains to be seen. But of course, as you say, the sticking point here is that the Israelis do not want to agree to a permanent ceasefire, which seems to be a key demand from Hamas. At the same time, Rym, there's also rising tensions between the US and Israel on the prospects of a two-state solution here. And what we've seen from the Europeans is this fresh warning of, quote, consequences for Israel if the government continues to oppose that two-state solution. I'm just curious to get a sense from you about what you think those consequences might be and what power the Europeans actually have from their own perspective to try and move the needle here to bring about some kind of effective solution on the ground.
Well, it would be quite a big shift if the EU is able to impose consequences, whether it's on Israel or anyone else. So really big question mark about what exactly is going to actually happen concretely if they were to agree on this. Don't forget that within the EU, you have 27 member states, and among the 27, there are deep divisions. You have a group that is staunchly in support of Israel, led by Germany, but also Austria and Hungary. You have a group that is staunchly in support of Palestinians and their political rights. You find Ireland and Belgium in that group and others. You have France trying to be sort of in a balanced approach. And then you have a lot of the Eastern European and Baltic states who aren't necessarily very sort of involved or committed to this issue. They feel like Ukraine is a more important issue. And so trying to get consensus to impose any kind of consequences on Israel is going to be quite difficult. That being said, the EU does have leverage with Israel. The EU is Israel's largest trade partner. And so in that way, there is that kind of financial leverage. But we haven't heard yet of any concrete ways of how they would want to use that leverage. A lot like the US, where you see, as you were saying, these increasing tensions and disagreements publicly between the US administration and the Israeli war cabinet and the Israeli government. But so far, the US, which has much more leverage with Israel than the EU, the US administration has been quite reluctant to use that leverage.
Indeed, you make a good point with regards to the European perspective here, because it's Russia's war against Ukraine that appears, at least from the European perspective, to be the ultimate foreign policy objective right now and the greatest threat to European stability. Just with regards to the US position, we know that the Biden administration has been, for want of a better word, perhaps distancing itself a little from the Netanyahu administration in Israel, particularly on prospects of a two-state solution. But the US is also coming into a really, really feisty election at the end of the year, and the fate of the Biden administration remains to be seen at this point. So from your perspective, how could the US election impact the outcome of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza? And, you know, this question of whether or not Netanyahu is ultimately going to survive, or whether or not the war will actually run that long, are also two key unknowns at this point.
Well, Dan, I think you laid that out really well, that field of unknowns that we are now entering, and it's going to be a long tunnel until November 2024. The first unknown, of course, is the course of Israeli politics. Are we going to have elections? Is Netanyahu going to be able to run again? If he does, is he going to be able to win with a coalition? What kind of coalition is he going to win with? When you look at the latest polling in Israel, some of it is contradictory, because depending on the polls you're looking at, for example, this morning, Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, has a poll that shows that a very slight majority, 51.3% of Israelis polled, would support a ceasefire for hostages. But that is not the position, of course, of Netanyahu and his coalition. On the other hand, we've seen other polling in the past few weeks that shows that actually a plurality of Israelis do not support that kind of halt to the war and want the Israeli military to, quote unquote, finish the job against Hamas. But the question is, what does finishing the job against Hamas really look like? And perhaps that is starting to daunt on the Israeli public, in addition to increasing worries about the state of the hostages. How many are still alive? How many are in bad shape? So that is one set of unknowns. And then you have the question of the American elections and whether, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu thinks that President Biden is in a very tough spot and so is wagering on Trump winning and just trying to wait out until November.